Whether you realize it or not, everything around you, from the economy to the environment, right down to your very DNA, is part of this invisible, deeply interconnected web. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into Dr. Susan Edwards' really fascinating research on our rapidly changing world. By digging into her core essay, Transformations, acknowledging, assessing, and achieving change, and zooming in specifically on this incredible concept she calls networks of life, we can actually start to decode the hidden rhythms of the modern world. Because understanding how these networks operate, that is absolutely crucial to making sense of exactly where we're headed. Mark Twain famously said, "History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes." And Dr. Edwards uses that exact idea to anchor a pretty brilliant truth. The specific details of our world are constantly shifting. On the surface, the social upheavals of the 1960s civil rights era look completely different than today's digital revolution, right? But the underlying rhythm of that societal transformation, it remains remarkably constant. We are literally always adapting to change. It's just the variables that look a little different each time. Just take a look around at the massive forces currently in flux across the globe. We are undeniably living in an age of transformation. Conservationists are desperately racing to document endangered species before we lose half of them by the next century. We've got natural disasters, like these recent hurricanes, requiring absolutely staggering, multi-billion-dollar recoveries. We're navigating a total digital revolution built on big data and witnessing global economic consolidation on a scale we've never even seen before. Everything is moving. The whole shebang is shifting. Let's actually zero in on that economic consolidation for a second. Back in the year 2000, you had 10 major U.S. airlines actively competing for your business. Today, that number has plummeted to just 4. Through this massive wave of mergers and buyouts, these 4 corporate giants consolidated their power so much that they now control a whopping 83% of the United States market. And with that competition wiped out, these companies were able to introduce a whole new ecosystem of fees for absolute luxuries, like getting an extra inch of legroom or, heaven forbid, checking a bag for your trip. Just to put that into perspective, in 2007, American Airlines made about $543 million in bag fees. By 2016, they squeezed an astonishing $4.2 billion out of travelers. A single shift in a distant corporate boardroom completely transformed how you and I experience everyday travel. Which brings us right to the central metaphor of Dr. Edwards' networks of life. I want you to imagine dropping a pebble into a totally still lake. Instantly, concentric waves start moving across the surface, right? And they inevitably disrupt locations all the way on the other side of the water. Our interdependent world works exactly like that lake. A transformation in one seemingly isolated area almost always leads to a profound change in an entirely different, unrelated area. We see these ripples everywhere. Think about quantum physics. When scientists were first exploring quantum theory, they were just looking at the absolute fabric of subatomic reality. But that incredible discovery, it allowed them to build atomic clocks, the most precise timekeepers in human history. And that pebble didn't just stay in a physics lab. The ripples of those quantum concepts are exactly what allow us today to have the split-second accuracy required to make everyday banking transactions. A breakthrough in theoretical physics literally transformed modern global finance. No way you could have predicted that. This pebble effect is incredibly visible out in nature too. Let's look at one of the coolest, most energetic examples of a positive ecological cascade, Yellowstone National Park. The pebble here, the National Park Service decided to reintroduce wolves into the park. Bam! As a result, the elk population shifted their locations to escape these new predators. And because the elk moved, willow trees weren't being overgrazed anymore, so they started surviving longer. Those thriving trees allowed beavers to flourish and build dams. The dams provided cool, shaded water, which caused fish and songbird populations to just absolutely boom. One single change at the top revived an entire, sprawling ecosystem. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. But, these ripples aren't always positive. Over in the Chesapeake Bay, a simple economic demand for oysters led to the invention of mechanical dredges. Well, those machines completely decimated the oyster population. Without oysters there to naturally filter the water, algae populations spiked out of control. The oxygen was depleted and marine biodiversity practically suffocated. A booming economic demand unintentionally dismantled an entire biological network. And this perfectly highlights the deep irony of our own human interventions. During the Great Depression, the government actually paid workers to plant an Asian vine called kudzu all throughout the American South. The goal was highly practical: combat soil erosion. But the reality? This fast-growing plant became an absolute monster. It climbed over trees and shrubs, effectively suffocating the southern landscape by completely blocking out the sunlight. A government effort to save the soil literally ended up killing the trees. And here's the thing. These networks of life aren't just out there in nature or the economy. They're actually inside of us, too. When humans experience major transformations, like severe stress or environmental hardship, it creates a biological ripple effect. Through a process called epigenetic modification, the intense stress experienced by a parent can actually physically impact the DNA of their children and even future generations. So the hardships you endure today might leave a genetic footprint on a grandchild you haven't even met yet. Mind-blowing, right? We also see this ironic backfire happening in our modern entertainment. Take early football. To stop the horrific skull fractures that kept happening, the NFL mandated the use of hard helmets. And hey, it solved the skull problem perfectly. But the hidden cost? Because players suddenly felt invincible, they started hitting each other way, way harder. So the skull was perfectly safe, but the brain inside was violently shaken, like an egg inside a shell, birthing the entire modern crisis of concussions and CTE we see today. This pattern just repeats endlessly throughout history. The 18th Amendment banned the manufacture and sale of alcohol in the U.S. as a way to cure society's ills. And sure, some public drunkenness did decline. But in the shadows, it birthed a massive black market, funding incredibly violent organized criminal syndicates that waged murderous warfare in the streets. Trying to legislate morality inadvertently handed the keys to the mob. Today, we're facing a highly digital version of this exact dilemma with big data. On one hand, you have Yale cardiologists and medical researchers fighting to share open medical data globally so they can crowdsource cures and save lives. It's a noble, incredibly important pursuit. But on the other hand, this hyperconnectivity makes us extremely vulnerable. The very data meant to connect and heal us can easily be weaponized by hackers to threaten elections, compromise infrastructure, and destabilize society as a whole. So, when we take a step back and look at all of this, from wolves in Yellowstone to corporate baggage fees, from the DNA of our children to global data hacking, it really forces us to ask some profound questions. How exactly are all these things interrelated? Realizing the sheer, mind-boggling complexity of these networks of life should spark immense intellectual curiosity for all of us. We simply have to start looking at our world not as a series of random, isolated events, but as a vast, invisible web where every single thread pulls on another. Which leads us to a pretty challenging, almost philosophical inquiry. Is it even possible to live in the world and not make an impact on it? Is it possible to exist and not have the world affect us? When you truly understand that planting a vine in the 1930s or downloading a file today drops a pebble into a global lake, you realize that true isolation is entirely impossible. You're a participant in this network, whether you intend to be or not. So I want to leave you with this lingering thought as we wrap up this explainer. Armed with this knowledge of our complex interconnectedness, take a look around your own life, your own industry, your own community. What are the known consequences of your actions? And more importantly, what correlations have not yet been found? What ripples are traveling across the lake right now, just waiting to crash onto a distant shore? Keep looking for those invisible connections, guys, because they're absolutely the key to anticipating our future.